Hello guys, welcome back to the Angular series. So far we have covered Angular installation, folder structure, components and interpolation in Angular. Today we will see what are the types of binding in Angular. So if you are new to this channel, please do subscribe. And coming to the types of binding in Angular, data binding can be achieved in two ways, like one-way binding and two-way binding. Coming to the one-way binding, we have two types. One is from component to view and other is from view to component. So again, from component to view, we have five types of binding, like interpolation, property, style, class and attribute. But for view to component, we have only one binding, that is event binding. So coming to the interpolation, already we have covered a lot about interpolation in the last video, so please go through that. And coming to the property binding, it is used to bind values of component or model properties to the HTML element. Depending on the values, it will change the existing behavior of the HTML element. So this is the syntax. We need to use a square brackets. Within that you need to write the property name, and in the RHS side you need to give the expression. So it is represented as square bracket. So we will see it in a demo. So we will discuss a lot of binding. So I'm taking a heading, that is property binding. And basically property binding is a kind of one-way binding that will bind the data from component to view. So how we did the interpolation in a similar way, in the TS file we have already have the public name that is assigned with user. So we would like to bind that user in the view using property binding this time instead of interpolation. So for that I'm taking a div, and within the div I am taking a span. So in this span we would like to print that user. So for that we need to make use of one-way binding, that is property binding. So property binding, as I told, you need to represent the property name within the square bracket. So I am writing inner HTML in the square bracket, and I am assigning it to the name exactly what I have taken in the TS file. Taking the name and I'm assigning to inner HTML. So I'm saving the file now. We'll see what will be the output. So I'm expecting it should be the user. Yes, exactly, the output is user. So this user is binding using the property binding. So we are binding the data from component to view, making use of property binding. Now we will see what are the limitations of interpolation, why we need to use property binding. So I'm taking the heading interpolation limitation. So we will test the limitation for the boolean variable. So why I am taking the boolean variables, in a moment you will understand that. So I am taking input type and a type as text, and I am taking a predefined property. Before that I am taking a boolean type, public is disabled is equals to initial. I am assigning it to the boolean value to true. I'm going to the HTML file and I'm making use of that disabled property, and I'm assigning it through interpolation to disabled. Okay, now we will see what will happen in action. So I'm saving it. See, I will be showing a text box with disabled mode on. Don't think that this is disabled because of that boolean variable, even though I'm making it false, but it is not enabling. That means the limitation is interpolation will not work for boolean type of variables. So to do so we need to make use of property binding. So now I'm making this as property binding, and I'm taking the is disabled thing, and now I'm saving it. See, now it is enabled. So for testing purpose I am making that to false, that is true, so that it should disable. Yes, it is disabled now. So this is the limitation of interpolation. Now we will see about attribute binding. So with attribute binding we can set the values of an attribute directly. The thing to note is that you must use the attribute binding only when there is no element property there to bind. For example, there are elements which don't have the property, like array, svg and table span attributes. So we will see that in the demo. You will be understanding easily instead of theoretically. The practical will give the more impact. So we will test that table element using attribute binding. Let's take a h2 tag and we'll say it is attribute binding, and we will test the table here. We will just write a table and then we will see how the attribute binding is going on. So for that I'll be writing a small code. I'm just speeding it up for time being. So here we have taken a table with student details, first name and user, first name as user. So we will apply the call span using attribute binding. So it is similar to property binding. Within the square brackets I am taking attr dot call span is equals to, let us say I'm taking 2. So I'm saving is, let's see how it will be. See, the call span is applied and it is 2. Now what we will do is, for attribute binding we will do some kind of negative testing. We will check what will be the error if we use interpolation or property binding in the call span attribute. So currently we are doing applying call span attribute using attribute binding, right? So we will test, can we apply using interpolation or not. If we can do that, then what is the use of attribute binding? So let's check. So see, I did just now, I did property binding, but it is throwing an error. Now I will check with interpolation. So I am removing the square brackets and I am writing the 2 within the curly brackets. So now how we will do the interpolation, such way I am applying it. So still it is not taking, it is still throwing an error. So with this negative testing we can clearly understand one thing, that we can't do attribute, we can't assign call span such kind of properties to HTML element through interpolation or property binding. It can be achieved only through attribute binding. Now I reverted the changes to back to attribute kind of binding. See, now we got the required output. So that's it about attribute binding. Into the class binding, by using this class binding we can add and remove CSS class names from the HTML elements. It is similar to attribute binding, but it starts with the prefix class, optionally forwarded by a dot and the name of the CSS. So I have written a pretty much simple CSS code to the table for centering and for the right and left align. So we will just apply it using class binding. So I'm just taking another heading for this time it is for class binding. So now I'll simply make use of the existing table. So I'm copying it. So I'm just pasting again. So same code. This time I am adding CSS class first. Class equal to, this is normal HTML kind of adding CSS. Just cross check this txt center, and now I will do the class binding. Like within the square brackets I need to write class. We need to use the dot, and we need to write the CSS name txt right. So we need to assign it to the true or false within the single text. So now I'm making it true. We will just check whether the CSS is applying to the HTML element or not. So for that we will just inspect the element, right click and click on the inspect, and just take the cursor there, pick the cursor and place it on the student details. See, here it is applying txt center and txt right. txt center is built-in CSS class we have applied, and txt right is from class binding. So now we'll just make it false and check. See, it is not applied. So this is how we can make use of the class binding. So we'll see about style binding. It is similar to attribute and class binding. It also starts with prefix style followed by a dot. So it is pretty much similar to class binding. Here their class dot class name, and here style dot style name. So here I will be taking a heading h2 tag. Within that I am writing style binding. So I will write a simple code again, simple table code. Like I will be taking a t head, and within the t head I will be taking a tr for t row, and I am taking a simple th element. I am just copying, making use of the existing one. I am taking the th. I would like to apply the styling. This time I will remove this class.txt, right? I will just write style dot. I will like to make use of font size. I would like to make a font size of 50. So style dot font hyphen size dot px is equal to 50. So now we will see. We will just save the file. We need to see the student details in the font size of 50. See, the student details is in the font size of 50. So in this way we can do the style binding. So with this we come to the end of component to view type of binding. Now we will see view to component type of binding, that is event binding. So event binding, I'm just making it maximizing. So event binding flows or binds the data from an HTML element to a component. So basically if anyone have an idea about JavaScript, they might have already known about on-click events. So it is pretty much similar to that. So for that I'm taking a h2 tag. I'm taking it as event binding, and this time instead of input element table and all, I will just take a button. What should happen is, if I click on that button, it should give some alert by using event binding. Okay, so I'm taking a button, yes, click me, and we need to do event binding. For that you need to go to the TS file. See, I got a button. This file, I would like to write a function, click me, and what should happen is, if you click on that button, this method should hit and it should write an alert, that is success, event binding is working. So whenever I'm hitting that button, in the alert it should prompt this, it should show this message like success, event binding is working. So I'm saving the TS file and I'm going to the HTML file, and here instead of square bracket we use the parenthesis. So within that you need to write a click event, and the click event should be from the click me function that we have written in the TS file. So now that's it done. Now we need to save it, and we just need to click on that click me. Now I'm just clicking it. See, success, event binding is working. So we are doing event binding from the TS file. What is the method we have written in the TS file? So click event is working. So not only click, we have a lot of such methods like mouse up, mouse down, and key up, key press. Such events can be done by using this. So here, see, I just made a small change, that instead of parentheses I just did square brackets. See, it is throwing an error. So with this we come to an end of one-way binding. In the next video we will talk about two-way binding. So that's it for today, guys. Thank you for watching.